I think the first thing that you have to do is you have to recognize that you have to have a strategy that you're going to be able to maintain and be consistent with. Because that consistency, as I said earlier, is what's going to lend itself to you being successful over time. There's a saying in finance:
Absolutely.
no one earns their way to wealth, they invest their way there. If you look at that in terms of what I'm talking about with food, it's the same thing. You don't get rich overnight. The people that get rich that quick usually lose it just as fast because you haven't expanded your identity. You know how you said I think it's a really good idea for people to see this as really a shift in their identity. I agree
Yep.
100%. I concur. If you see yourself as someone undeserving, unworthy of, and incapable of the type of discipline that precipitates the life you want, you will always come back to what that inner thermostat that you have is set at. So that's why it's so important that you take inventory of the way you see yourself. You start to expand the vision of yourself by immersing yourself in rooms of people that are living life at the edge in a way that's fulfilling, meaningful, gratifying, and healthy. And if you'll do that, you'll be moving in the right direction consistently.
Welcome my guest, Charles D'Angelo. He is a best-selling author, inspirational speaker, and the country's most sought-after weight loss and life transformational coach. As a teen coming from a tough background, weighing 360 pounds with a 50-inch waist, he took charge of his own life, first transforming himself, losing 160 pounds of fat, and chiseling a rock-solid physique. For nearly 2 decades, he's been on a mission to help others take control of their lives, freeing them from the chains and patterns of their past, and creating legendary results. As a renowned author, speaker, and personal coach, Charles has touched the lives of thousands through his coaching on television, radio, and live events. He has been endorsed by many notable individuals, including President Bill Clinton, Tony Robbins, Larry King, Richard Simmons, and Dr. Mark Hyman. He has also written the best-selling books Think and Grow Thin and Inner Guru, and can be heard weekly as a guest on TV and radio. Welcome back to another episode on Passion, Love, Pursuit podcast. I am so happy to bring on my today's guest, Charles D'Angelo. I am so honored to have you on. As I was talking about, I am so inspired by you, and I know everybody that's tuning in will be as well. Your story is truly impactful, but the wisdom you share is based on not only your experience and your journey to getting your health back, but also just what you've learned in the process of going through it yourself, and also all the people you coach today. So I'm honored to have you on. So welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. It's my pleasure.
Yeah. Well, let's go into, I always give my intros early on offline. So introduced you already. Let's just start with your story. So you weighed 360 pounds at age 17, quite young to get to that level, if you want to say, of weight gain. I would love to know what brought you to that point at age 17 to gain that weight.
So when I was 17, weighing 360 pounds, doing things that most people take for granted, getting from the car to the curb, going up a few stairs, approaching someone for a conversation, just moving in general was laborious. I mean, I could break a sweat at the simplest of activities. Um, what led me there was a history of using food, uh, albeit unconsciously. It's kind of a, shall we say, treatment plan for all sorts of difficulties that I was experiencing as a child. I was a very bright, very insightful little guy. I grew up in a family of very modest means. My parents were both blue collar folks, very good people, very well intentioned. But like all of our parents, had their own histories, had their own deficiencies, had their own difficulties. My father worked most of the time to support his fledgling family, and my mother was my best friend. And being a very gifted, bright little guy, most of my interest was in learning and spending my time with my mom. Well, by the time I was 10 years old, My mother had fallen into her own history, which was a terrible familial history of alcoholism and addiction. And she started to abuse alcohol and she became addicted to prescription drugs. And so overnight, my best friend turned my worst enemy. And so, as a
Mm.
kid being different, I'd already had to deal with teasing and bullying at school. So, that wasn't exactly my favorite place to be. And the person I could depend most on pretty much vanished overnight. Add to that the unpredictability that comes when you're living with a family member who's struggling with that type of problem. It was chaos, total chaos. And so, unintentionally, probably like many of you who are listening, maybe you can relate to this. I tried to distract myself and console myself with something that I knew in the short term would either anesthetize or calm or pacify the sense of pain that I was experiencing. Well, by the time I was 17, I was 360 pounds. I had a size 50-inch waist. Everything was really, really difficult, as I said. Now, from the outside looking in, I was an outstanding student. I had an incredible GPA. I was well liked by my peers in high school. I went to an all boys school, CBC High School in St. Louis, Missouri. I was voted Student of the Year a number of years in a row. So I had learned how to compartmentalize really well, how to keep things that were problematic out of my awareness as far as I knew. Well, it certainly really wasn't on my awareness because I was eating in such a way that I was every day shortening my life significantly. That's what brought me to 360 pounds.
Okay, so now the question, the big question is what shifted in you to make a radical change to take responsibility and ownership of your health at age 17? Because I believe that's when you started to shift your life. So, what changed in you? What was the catapult or the catalyst that uh, shifted you to take responsibility?
Well, I could have been the king of excuses. You might have a history like mine where you have every reason to believe that there's no hope, that you shouldn't have any expectation of a better life than the one that you've been growing up in. But I was very fortunate to have a series of events. It wasn't one thing. And I find for most people that come to see me, people that come to lose 100 pounds, 200 pounds, sometimes 300 or more pounds, as well as those people that come to me because they just want to lose 10 or 15 pounds. We find that it's never just one thing that throws you over the threshold. It's usually a number of things. You finally get to a point where you say, not another day, not another week, not another month is going to go by where I'm going to continue to live this way. Part of that's a mystery. It's easy when our egos get caught up in it to say, well, this is exactly what can make you change. But the truth is, in all of my decades, now almost 2 decades of coaching people, there's a certain aspect of this transformation process that's mysterious. A lot of it has to do with timing. And all of us can think of things that we stayed too long in that we should have left long ago, right? Maybe it's a relationship. Maybe you've been with someone that's been abusive or someone who's been unfaithful or someone who really hasn't made the type of investment into your life that you've made into theirs. And there's this imbalance, right? Well, that's the type of relationship that I had with food. I didn't really have a good relationship with myself. I had spent so much time trying to rescue my mom from herself. And I don't want to put my mom down. Both my parents are deceased, and when they were living, I was very
Mm.
careful not to talk about this in detail because I didn't want my parents to feel that in some way they failed. As I said earlier, each one of us, I have a child, each one of us have our faults. We do the best we can with what we have. But it was very clear to me as a young person that I really wanted my mom to be around, and I was willing to do whatever it took to try to save her from herself. How many of us spend so much time trying to control everything on the outside, not at all realizing that the only true influence and power we have is over ourselves? And certainly most children don't have that insight. So I came to a moment of clarity. I recognized that if my life was going to get better, the only way that that was going to be the case wasn't if I changed the poor neighborhood I lived in, wasn't if my mother became sober or gave up prescription drugs. It wasn't going to be because all of a sudden I found some type of magic bullet that would allow me to go from fat to fit overnight. It was going to be, I was going to have to change myself. And that led me to a process of discovery. I mean, I tried all the diets, I tried the exercise programs, I tried the books, I tried the pills, I tried this, I tried that. And I found through all those different attempts, having come to the place that I really did want to change, that there was something missing. How many gyms are there? How many trainers are there? How many nutritionists are there? All that information is out there. I mean, you could just, throw a rock and you'll find someone who can offer you a path to take yourself from being overweight or unhealthy to becoming fit. But if that was the answer, if a book, if a piece of fitness equipment, if a pill were the answer, if an injection were the answer, I don't think that I would have had the problem I had. And I don't think that the people that come to see me would be plagued by the problems they have. There was something missing. And that missing aspect is what I call the mindset. It's how do you learn how to disconnect from something that's become so baked in a sense, so hardwired, you're kind of held captive to it. How do you break those chains and free yourself to have the life that not only do you desire, but you deserve? So I spent the next 2 years soaking up everything I possibly could through mentorship, finding people that had the type of life that I wanted to have, reading, exhaustively reading as much as I could, taking as much information. So having a strategy was a part of it. But I really had to recognize that if I was going to employ that strategy, it was going to be because I really started to have a different philosophy and attitude about what was going to be necessary to create the change. And that was going to be shifting the way that I related to myself, shifting the way I related to food, shifting the way that I related to other people, shifting the way I related to exercise. And that's what my work with people is on. Nutrition plays a part, as does physical fitness and activity. But those are two legs of this, what I consider a three-legged stool. Food is one, physical fitness, activity, exercise is a second leg. But the third leg, what keeps the stool balanced, is mindset. And that's really what people have to focus in on if they're going to have lasting change. Any number of things can create short-term change. But if you want to create change in terms of medium to long term, you've got to have more of a strategic approach rather than a tactical one.
So I'm like shaking my head, agreeing to everything you say, because this is exactly what I talk about a lot. I mean, as I was talking about you before we press record, my lifestyle has been fitness and health for multiple decades. And that's always been a cornerstone for me. So I've created this lifestyle, if you want to say. But when I share the same thing, is creating a lasting approach. It comes very much down to the mindset and the identity and the standards you hold for yourself. What is your relationship with yourself, and what is the standard you're setting for yourself? And I think a lot of people don't address this issue. And I love that you speak so highly about this, because it is a cornerstone that's missing, that a lot of people don't think about when they're trying to lose weight. Like, oh, I need to try this diet. Oh, that's not working. I'll try this one, this exercise. But you could lose weight, sure, but keeping it off and having lasting change and changing your identity, your different relationship with food and health, it comes down to developing this, really, you want to say, a bulletproof mindset and a standard that you won't accept anything less than living a healthy life. And so I love that you speak so heavily onto this. So we'll go into more of these cornerstones that you speak on. So going into talking about this lasting change, when people come to you and wanting to lose weight, do you feel that's the one component they haven't really thought about, like their mindset around? But I think it's sort of addressing their identity. I believe is a lot of people will say like, oh, everyone in my family is overweight. This is how we grew up. And they don't really have this healthy mindset around creating the habits that withstand where they want to go.
Mm-hmm.
So is that what you feel is the common thread between all the clients that come to you, that's what's hindering them?
Well, I tried to avoid generalizations. I mean, you packed a lot of questions into your into what you just said. So let me try to address each thing that you've said, because there were a few things that stuck out to me. I think that would be worth coming.
Yeah.
The first thing I would say is I think that while it's very important to have a very high standard for yourself, one thing I've learned, my experience has taught me both personally and professionally, is you also have to have a degree of flexibility and compassion for yourself. I think you have to realize that we can have wonderfully high standards, but we also have to make room for what I call the givens of life, things that come up that surprise us, that we all carry with us a cargo, if you will, of our history. Sitting inside of me is my entire family lineage. Sitting inside of you is your entire family lineage. And it's certainly true. I agree with you that our choice has more to do with the direction of our life than our history ultimately will, as long as you're conscious of it. The thing that a lot of people don't
Mm-hmm.
really make room for is a lot of what we're doing is totally outside of what we're thinking about. A lot of what we do, no one wakes up every day and says, I'm going to do the same stupid things I did yesterday. No one does that. But their life, year after year, stays where it is or really continues to spiral in the direction they're dissatisfied with. So a lot of this comes with, to your point, raising your standard, but having a degree of acceptance, of maturity, of saying yes to the way life is. You mentioned that a lot of people that you've talked to will go through an itemized list of all the reasons to justify feeling secure in where they presently find themselves. And that's most often because there are two enemies, I think, to change in life. And by change, I mean taking your life in a new direction, charting a new course for yourself. There's an inherent fear in taking that step because uncharted territory at an instinctual level is very threatening because you haven't been there. And so, if you think about it from a biological perspective, if you don't know the territory, you don't know the threats in that territory. So, the devil you know is better than the devil you don't know. That old axiom you might have heard. It's some people allow fear, which is one of the enemies of change, to hijack them. That little goblin that sits on the edge of each of our beds when we wake up in the morning and says, you better stay home today. It's dangerous out there. You might fail. You might not be able to do it. You might not be able to follow through. If we listen to that voice, if we feed that voice, it becomes stronger. It becomes more part of what drives our behaviors. But we have to know that sitting on our beds, each one of us, is fear. There isn't any leader, and I've worked with world leaders, I've worked with actors, actresses, musicians, I've worked with stay at home parents, I've worked with scores and scores of medical doctors. I haven't met one of those professionals, some of the brightest, most competent, most successful individuals that we can consider um, gracing this planet, who don't have some level of fear. Fear is not a bad thing. You need to learn how to harness it. You need to actually be able to welcome it and step into it rather than run away from it. And most of us, my former self included, and there are still times in my life where something comes up and I can notice those feelings come up in me as well. We have to be conscious of what's going on within ourselves well enough that we can be responsive rather than reactive to the circumstances of our life. So one enemy is fear. The other enemy is lethargy. What's lethargy? It's a fancy word for kind of procrastination. It's letting the natural gravity of life pull us down, saying, "I'll do it tomorrow." Now, you
Right.
worked out yesterday. Look, I mean, man, your clothes were wringing wet, and not to mention, you've lost 3 pounds this week. Take it easy, relax. You need to lighten up a little bit. If we allow that to become too prominent of a voice we listen to as well, our life will still remain stagnant. So, two of the things that you have to be very, very aware of are fear and lethargy. I think that having a flexible approach with yourself, recognizing that success is not linear, it doesn't happen in a straight line. How many clients I have come in here and they're frustrated when, after a week or two of healthy habits, they don't see the rapid change on the scale they would wish for. Well, when you've been practicing the wrong habits for 32 years, you have to make some room for the time it's going to take to turn the momentum around. So being flexible, having some compassion, that's all part of self-love. And I hate when people throw that term around, self-love. But being loving to yourself doesn't mean giving yourself license to disregard a standard. It means understanding that you're human, understanding that you're not going to hit home runs all the time. It means being flexible with that standard so that when you do notice that, hey, I fell a little short of where I wanted to be, you compare yourself today to who you were yesterday or a month ago, not to someone that you saw on Instagram or Facebook that you have no idea of the inner workings of their lives.
Yeah, I think it's so important that you mentioned the compassion part because I think that's where a lot of people, when they're on a diet and let's say they mess up, then they're like, I messed up, I'm a failure, like, and then they just quit there. And it's like, it's okay. Tomorrow's a new day. Let's start fresh again. Let's implement those habits and whatnot. So, talking about building this mindset, what would be the first steps? Like the I know everybody's different, but what would be some of the first steps you would start addressing or asking people to question to guide them on a clearer path to get to that next goal? Like, let's say it is, I'm just going to say 50 or more pounds. That's a big task to take on. And it takes these certain habits that you need to implement in your everyday and plan for. So, my question is basically where would you have people begin, especially in building the mindset? Because nutrition, fitness is another aspect that I want to go into, but let's talk about the mindset most
Yeah, I
importantly.
think you're talking about things that are all of one piece. So I like the way you put it. The thing I would say first and foremost is that you have to have aims for yourself that compel you to really stay on target with whatever approach you're particularly going to take, given your circumstance, given your situation. I think that you need to recognize that a strategy is only going to take you as far as the reasons that you feel that strategy is necessary. If you don't have really strong reasons, it's going to be very difficult when adversity shows up to stay with it. When your significant other compliments you and says, let's go out for drinks. When your girlfriends call and say, hey, after book club, let's go grab something to eat. It's really hard to stay true to yourself when you don't have a really clear picture of what you're after. So, the first thing a person must do, in my estimation, is get incredibly clear on what it is they want. A lot of people come in and they'll say, I just don't know. I don't know what I want. Well, that's not exactly true. And the way that you can discern that's not true is this. If you don't know what you want, I bet you know what you don't want. So
Hmm.
if you don't know what it is you're after, here's a really simple way of getting some clarity and really getting an orientation, finding yourself um, your position on your map, because that's what's most disorienting to people is when the map they have in their head doesn't match what they're experiencing. When they think they're doing what should be working and they are not making any progress, that's very, very scary to people because it's like if you went to the neighborhood where your house was and your house is gone and you're like, there's a street sign. Where's my house? It's a very scary, anxiety-inducing experience when the map we have in our brains doesn't match our current circumstance. Well, if you don't know where you are, or you don't know what you want, any variation of that, what you need to recognize is what you don't want. So think about if I continued to allow my life to drift, I don't take any conscious action towards anything. Okay. Well, I'll expect more of the same. So, where do I think my life will be if I just let it all go? How will my relationships be? How will my health be? 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, 20 months from now. And it's not fun to do this, by the way, because it's very anxiety provoking because you start to become very
Mhm.
associated to the pain you'll experience if you don't start to take charge of the things that only you can take charge of. I always tell my clients, while I get tremendous amounts of gratitude and appreciation for the influence and the impact I have on my clients' life, I always let my clients know they're the ones that do it. I just show them the
Right.
way. They're the ones that they're standing on their own 2 feet. That I may accompany them, I may be navigating or cajoling them along the way, but the reality is it's their decision to take step after step in the direction of what we've decided that gets them there. So that goes to something else you said that I wanted to make a mention of, which is failure is not a person; it's an event. So none of us are failures. You know, um, a man who had a profound influence on me and a lot of leaders, Tony Robbins, who was kind enough to give an
I
endorsement to my
do.
work. He uh, he may have been requoting someone else when he said this, but he has always said that he doesn't see failure in his life unless he goes through something having not learned anything from it. I think that's a beautiful definition, a beautiful reframe of what failure ought to be for you. Failure isn't not getting what you want because we tend to think in terms of a specific timeline. If you will just recognize it may not be here now, but if you'll stay consistent with it, eventually you will bring that into your life. You'll continue to move in the direction of what you want. but you have to stay steady with it. So you've got to have an orientation of what you don't want, first step, if you don't know where you are on this map, so to speak, of your life. And then once you know what you don't want, you want to look to, what do I want? Where do I want to be? How do I want to look? How do I want to feel? You know, what are the experiences you can think back on in your life that have inspired you? You know, have you ever bumped into someone you said, man, you had a little flavor of envy or jealousy, like, man, I'd love to have a house like that, or I'd love to have strength like that, or I'd love to have a relationship like theirs. You know, use that constructively. Use that as a cue. What I always tell my clients, what you admire in other people is what you haven't activated in yourself.
Mm.
And the same is true about what you despise in other people. What you despise in other people is what you don't notice about yourself. So you're projecting onto another person what you're not allowing yourself to integrate and recognize is if you talk to people that could go off record, would probably say the thing you hate about other people is the thing that you do a lot of to them, and you're just not acknowledging that. So you want to realize there are some clues. What you admire is the potential that you haven't activated within you. So when I have a client come in and let's say it's a young man and he talks about how much he admires a UFC fighter, and he's always experienced himself as timid, he's always experienced himself as shy, he always experienced himself as weak in his mind. Okay, none of those things are actually true because he has the same capacity that he's admiring in this person. And if he uses that information to say, well, what I admire in him is something I could actually actuate myself if I have the right strategy, then he becomes more whole. And I think that's what the whole process is about. I would not look at when you said that if a person has 50 pounds to lose, it's a very daunting task. Well, the way that you avoid ever having to even consider those feelings is you don't look at the aim as weight loss. You look at weight loss as the dividend. The aim is
Mm.
consistency. The weight loss will take care of itself if you're consistent. So the real question then becomes, what do I need to set up in my life so that I can be utterly consistent in the necessary actions to make, we'll call it considerable progress, reasonable progress in a reasonable amount of time. And you'd be surprised to lose 100 pounds, okay, in 10 months. It sounds like that's a very fast pace, but the reality is that's just 10 pounds a month. And if you look at the weight loss as a function of being consistent with an intelligent, sound plan, you don't feel overwhelmed at the things in front of you. So I would focus more on day-to-day, one-item issues, one-item actions that you can take in regard to whatever it is you're after. A lot of people that might be listening to this podcast, you might not have any interest in weight loss. You might have an interest in developing a deep, intimate relationship. Maybe developing the courage to even start dating someone. It may be that your financial house is way out of order. It may be you don't have any savings and you feel overwhelmed with debt. There are the same principles and disciplines that I teach people to be able to achieve this goal of physical transformation can be applied to all those other domains. It's the same thing. You have to have an aim, a very well defined, high resolution image of what you want. You then have to come up with the reasons that those things are actually meaningful, because if they're not, they're just going to be trivial and you'll dispense with them as soon as challenges come up. You have to have a strategy that's intelligent but flexible. And then you have to find a way of staying accountable so that when things do get difficult, you're able to stay the course in the face of those difficulties.
I love everything you shared, and it's so, so key. Obviously, that's why your coaching really works. These are all essential pillars, if you want to say. And so moving from the mindset, there's a lot of I feel there's a lot of layers to building a bulletproof mindset, and you touched on some of them. But let's talk about the strategy a little bit, because you mentioned two important words is conscious and
Mhm.
consistency with anything. And like you said, your coaching, literally, you could apply this to every area of your life. These are still the pillars of creating success really in anything. And so that's why I love that this is not just about weight loss, actually, but talking about the strategy for weight loss. I know that you talk about planning, how planning is important. And I think this is really important to bring up because I think a lot of people, possibly that maybe is not feeling, that doesn't have a coach, let's say somebody is not able to afford a trainer, somebody to coach them through the process. But if they were to plan on their own, what would you say needs to be in place to set up this strategy to achieve the goal?
So first, I think that we all have to accept that we all have the money. It's where do we spend it? So
There you go.
when you make a choice like giving up the Starbucks, giving up the fast food, the drive-through, giving up the things that really no longer are necessary because you're going to be investing your time in different places, you find that income could be invested in something that would have a more positive and lasting impact on your future. So the first thing is you want to make sure that you're calling yourself out on any excuses you might have, like, well, I just don't have the money. I always have found, this is my own personal philosophy and my experience, when something's a must for me, I make it happen. So I think that you have to make these things a must. You might not. You might say to yourself, I just don't have the resources. Okay. Well, you have
Mhm.
to be a little more resourceful. And what does that mean? Maybe that means that you're going to go to your best friends and you're going to say, I'm going to fully leverage myself. Would you lend me this? And when I am at a place and I'm healthier, I give you my word that I will repay you. Or maybe someone will give it to you as a gift. My point is, when something becomes a necessity, when it's a real must, like if it was your child who was sick, had some type of terminal illness, and they needed some type of treatment, okay? If you're a healthy parent, you're going to do every single thing that you possibly can think of, beg, borrow, whatever, to be able to get that child what he or she needs. You have to have that same type of attitude towards yourself. You need to take yourself seriously enough to put aside this idea of, well, I can't get what I really need. That's nonsense. You're resourceful, you're intelligent, you're creative. Resourcefulness, okay, is the most important equity that any of us have. We can all make
Mm.
money, okay, but the money isn't what you should be chasing. It should be being a source, being creative. How am I going to use my life as a gift to other people? If you're a business person, if that stays as the intention, you won't ever have to worry about money. And you won't ever feel like you're working either because you'll be so on purpose. My life has blossomed the way it has, not because I had some type of strategic business plan for how I was going to become, an eminent coach in the world. That wasn't it. I asked myself, how, when I meet with someone, can I discipline myself to give all that I possibly can, to be totally focused on them, to be totally present? And when I notice if I've had a long day or if I have things going on in my own life, if I'm getting fuzzy or if I'm not as sharp or as I'm not if not as present, I won't see people that day. Because in order to be effective, I have to be fully there. And I think all too often, a lot of us are going through our lives on autopilot. So, to answer your question in one way, it would be make certain that you're not making excuses for not getting what you need. If you've done all sorts of things, a lot of people will tell me, I've tried everything. Well, the reality is,
Yeah.
they've been inconsistent with everything. And so sometimes you've got to have a little tough love. And in today's culture, that's sometimes something people are afraid to give people because they're afraid that it's going to come across as shaming the person. I think sometimes the best thing that a person can do is tell you the truth. And I don't think
Mm.
it needs to be said in a harsh, mean spirited way. I think that's why coaches like me are able to actually continue to practice the way we do, because when it's coming from the right place, people feel it. If it was malicious, if it was with the intention to wound that person, that would be felt. That's never the way I come at people. I might have to say things that people don't like, often, in fact. But the reality is they know it's coming from a place of love for them and love for the part of them that's healthy. I always tell my clients, I'm partnering with the healthy part of you. There's two people sitting in front of me here. There's the person that's on board with making these changes, and there's the person that's looking for every opportunity to abort this entire process as quickly as possible. Okay? I'm always going to be aligned with that healthy part of you. This unhealthy part of you might get very angry at what's going on. Okay? And you have to understand that's par for the course. When people work with me, for example, they sign up for the entire process up front. That's purposeful. Why? Because there are going to be many times along a journey like this that you're going to want to quit. And when you leverage
Mhm.
yourself, when you made a commitment, I'm in for the long haul, whatever that period is, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, and they paid money for it and it's non refundable, then it's a lot more likely that they're going to be able to weather those adverse times. If you're a person that, for whatever reason, you've talked to your friends, you've exhausted your creativity in terms of coming up with means to be able to hire someone like me to help you. The next best thing that you could do would be find someone who's a role model for you, who has the lifestyle and has achieved the things you want to achieve, and begin modeling it right away. Now, you don't even have to be in an area of affluence to do that. You don't have to be around people that are fit, healthy, successful. You can go to the library, you can go to the bookstore, you can go to the internet, YouTube, and you can find talks from people who have done the very thing that you're aiming at doing, who are more than happy to share in lectures, in talks, in courses, and very, very modest fees, if any. Much of the stuff on YouTube is completely free, that you can get that type of inspiration and often strategy. But it's going to take a little bit more work. When you have a coach, it's very custom to you. You're meeting with the person, that person's is invested. You have to be a real self-starter if you're going to have someone that you never meet in person have an influence on you and really help you change your life. I'm not saying it's impossible. In fact, that was a major aspect of how I changed my life. I listened to the greats, the Jim Rohns of the world, the people that have had a profound influence on the more modern day teachers. I mean, think about, I mentioned Tony Robbins. His teacher was Jim Rohn. Yeah. Well, think about that. Yep. You can go online and listen to a seminar from Jim Rohn for free for him talking, yep, with him talking for 4 hours or something. Okay. Getting the same experience that changed the life of someone like Tony Robbins, and it cost you nothing. But you have to realize, yep, advice is sometimes worth what you pay for it. Excuse me. So if you're not invested, the probability of you taking it as seriously as you otherwise would at some level may not be there. So when you really invest a lot of something, if you make a sacrifice, you take a paycheck to attend a seminar, for example, it's far more likely you're going to actually take that stuff seriously than if you just watch a YouTube video. Now, there are exceptions. Yeah. There are people that are hungry, people that they just need the information. If you're one of those people, great. But I would say that you're of the few. Most people will go buy the book, listen to the talk, read the first chapter, and shelve it. And so that's why having someone in your life, whether it's a coach, whether it's a mentor, whether it's a role model, but get someone in your life that's going to help you see what you're unable to see in yourself right now, the greatness within you. All of us have genius. All of us have greatness. But in order to manifest it, we've got to be able to overcome our conditioning, overcome the beliefs we've developed about ourselves and we've picked up along the way. And often that requires someone who's completely outside of our circle of influence, who can be totally objective without the fear of losing whatever they're getting from the relationship. That's what's great about having a coach, is when you're working with a good coach, your needs are tantamount. It's not about what the coach gets. The only thing they get is what you paid them. That's it. Their whole focus is to be able to be in your life to help you become more of who you want to be. And they might have to say something that might risk you liking them, but that's part of the job. Their interest should not be being liked. Their interest should be being effective, helping you become more of yourself.
Absolutely. And I think it's so important you mentioned the mentorship and really putting yourself in an environment that's going to serve you to go where you want to go. And I think sometimes people, when they're on a weight loss journey, and correct me if I'm wrong, if people are on a weight loss journey, sometimes they don't change their environment, and our environment influences us and keeps us in the same space. So once we start listening to different content of people that are where we want to go, that will be able to influence your current environment. Because sometimes people can't, let's say their whole family is overweight or whatnot, or bad habits. It's hard to change yourself in the same environment. So that's why I love you talk about fill yourself up with people that have or are where you want to go. So I think that's an important step. Can we talk about a little bit, as you were saying, the 3 legs of success? There is the mindset, there's the nutrition, and then there's the exercise or movement. So if we could touch on nutrition, because I mean, again, they're all important pillars. They all play together in a symphony. But nutrition, what would you say is the base, like that needs to change immediately if you're going to be healthy? number one, but also on the path of losing weight.
So I like the way you put it because I see it as harmonic as well. I think that the integration of those
Mhm.
three aspects, the right activity, the right food, the right way of thinking, the right philosophy, attitude, I call that mindset, is integral to creating kind of a machine of change, kind of like three gears, not only three legs of a stool, but three gears. And for this machine to operate, all three gears have to be moving. You know, you could have two moving, but if one is jammed, the machine isn't going to be as efficient. When it comes to food, before I get into that, I want to make a comment about what you said about environment because that plays into the food part. There's an old saying that we're the average of the five people we're closest to. So it's really important to recognize what you're feeding yourself. When you said nutrition, that's why I'm bringing this up, because what you're feeding
Yep.
yourself isn't just what you're putting in your mouth. The nutrition that you're taking in isn't just what you get at the grocery store. It's what are you taking in through your eyes? What are you watching? What are you listening to? What are you letting touch you, or what are you keeping from touching you? So, what are you allowing to actually nourish you? Okay, to give you sustenance. You really need to give a more global consideration to the nourishment you're getting. You could eat the best food. You could go to the organic store every week and have the most pristine, precise eating approach, but be absolutely miserable spiritually and relationally. So
Yeah.
nutrition, you want to think about it more holistically. You know, more of I would think about it not just about what you're eating; it's what you're consuming. So it's not about eating as much as what you're consuming. And so you want to do an inventory. Who are you spending a lot of time with? I have one of my best friends grew up in a very difficult environment. He was raised by his mother. His father was an addict. His stepfather was a good guy, but he struggled with alcoholism as well. And his biological father died of an overdose, and his stepfather took his own life. So my friend could
Wow.
as well have had every environmental reason to follow in that path, on that path. You can choose to use the people's lives around you as an example and model those things and have the same outcome you saw, or you can use them as a warning. And you can say,
Mm.
never let that be my life. And you see two kids that grew up in the same household, like one I just described. One goes on to be an incredibly generous philanthropist who leads businesses and who has a wonderful family. The other person ends up in prison. What's the difference, right? So while environment plays a part, you have to recognize it still comes back to what we talked about in the first few minutes, which is what choice are you going to make in light of what's happened to you? What are you going to decide? So, to bring that to the more practical side of your question, which is what do we need to do with food? Well, first, I think the best diet is one that you stick with. So, I think that you have to
Mm.
have an approach to eating that is integrated into your way of life. The way I recommend people do that is set up a schedule so that they eat a lot of the same things every day. So it takes thought and consideration out of it, particularly when you've had a very unhealthy relationship with food for a long time. Much like a person who's trying to get in recovery, who's trying to achieve sobriety. You can't get well and heal yourself up if you still drink on the weekends. So it's really
Mhm.
important that you can't get better while you're still using. So I recommend setting up a very, very precise eating plan where you're eating all nutritious, nutrient dense foods, starting with breakfast, and eat about every 3 hours and decide upon what those foods are going to be and stay consistent with it for at least 14 days. Why 14 days? So that you get into the pattern of not looking to food as a choice, nor do you turn to food as a distraction or as a means of trying to console yourself when things are difficult. It's just what you do. It's like brushing your teeth. It's like putting your clothes on. It's like taking a shower. It's like putting gas in the car. It's just what you do every day. If you can get yourself to the place where that's the way you truly not only think, but you feel about your behaviors, you're all set. It's smooth sailing from there. What most people do is they'll do well for a few days and then they go ahead.
Oh.
Are you okay there?
Yeah.
Let me start there. They go ahead and they do well for a few days and then they'll use the food that they used to be eating that wasn't good to reward themselves. Well, they're conditioning themselves for
Mm.
the very thing they don't want. That is, they're using food as a reward and it's unhealthy food, so they're reinforcing the idea that this unhealthy thing is a positive, makes me feel good. So what I recommend you do is you've got to kind of white knuckle it. You've got to decide, look, I've decided that I'm going to take full responsibility for this situation. I'm going to set up a plan that keeps me full. That's why my clients do so well. All of my clients eat all real food from the grocery store. So there's nothing that's exotic or difficult about it at all. It's not complicated. It's very fundamentally simple,
Right.
but it's very boring. And the reason that's boring is because food isn't supposed to be your major source of gratification in life. It can be one of them. It can be one of the buildings on the landscape of your life, but it shouldn't be the main one. It shouldn't be taking up the entire landscape. It should be one thing amongst the landscape of your life. Well, for the people that come to see me, it has monopolized their life. It's not a little
Right.
thing. It's their whole thing for many people. Okay, and it may not be that they're going through Dairy Queen 3 times a day. It may not be that. It disguises itself in funny ways, like not eating all day and then just overeating at night. There's no real plan to what they're doing. So I think the first thing that you have to do is you have to recognize that you have to have a strategy that you're going to be able to maintain and be consistent with. Because that consistency, as I said earlier, is what's going to lend itself to you being successful over time. There's a saying in finance:
Absolutely.
no one earns their way to wealth, they invest their way there. If you look at that in terms of what I'm talking about with food, it's the same thing. You don't get rich overnight. The people that get rich that quick usually lose it just as fast because you haven't expanded your identity. You know how you said, I think it's a really good idea for people to see this as really a shift in their identity. I agree
Yeah.
100%. I concur. If you see yourself as someone undeserving, unworthy of, and incapable of the type of discipline that precipitates the life you want, you will always come back to what that inner thermostat that you have is set at. So that's why it's so important that you take inventory of the way you see yourself. You start to expand the vision of yourself by immersing yourself in rooms of people that are living life at the edge in a way that's fulfilling, meaningful, gratifying, and healthy. And if you'll do that, you'll be moving in the right direction consistently.
Absolutely. Oh, there's so much wealth of information you shared right there. I mean, I think, you know, it I know there's a lot of shifts that needs to happen in somebody's mindset and their relationship with food, a relationship with what their behaviors are, their habits. And it's almost like we were talking about is shifting into a new identity, not changing who you are, but are you in alignment with the version of you wish to become? And that takes consistency, habits. Nothing, I know there's a lot of diets out there, lose 5 pounds in 2 days, or like, lose blah blah blah, and then there's all these like quick fixes. But that what we're really talking about and what you've done with your life, I believe, if I'm correct, you lost 170
100,
pounds in 2 years.
160 pounds in 2 years.
Yeah, which is mind blowing. But what's so amazing, you're showing people by example, this is possible.
Mm-hmm.
And you've done it for yourself. You coach people to do it as well for themselves. And I love how you empower people that you are somebody that's by their side, helping them through the process, but you're not the one actually accomplishing the results. They are. And that's so empowering. And I think it's so great that you're giving people the the knowledge and the confidence that they too can do it. And I think that's so key because I think so many people are defeated because they're like, I've tried everything, as you mentioned. And so you're giving them a window into like, this is possible. It's just, what are you going to do to build the steps to get there? And it's going to take work. It's going to take consistency and habits. And so I think another component I don't think we've touched on a little bit, but is self-discipline. And I think, as you talked about, that leverage is what creates the discipline, is having that deep seated why of why do you want this health? Because you want to be there for your grandkids, or you don't want to feel like you feel in your body, tired every day. And I believe that's what develops that self discipline. And I love this line. I'm sure you've heard this before, but they say, like, are you treating your body like a rental car? Or are you treating it like the Ferrari it's made to be? Because our bodies are
Mm-hmm.
miraculous. But, and also on the other side of that is saying, like, when you're feeding your body, are you either nourishing it, because food is meant to nourish, or are you eating something that is deteriorating your
Mhm.
health? Because it's really one or the other. Uh, there's not really the in between. And so I think that's really, I mean, everything you share is brilliant. And it's really the foundation of creating lasting
Well,
change. And so if you were, it's remarkable and I love it. I'm literally like sitting here just agreeing because it's so brilliant what you share. And I think you, just this message alone in the, almost hour that we've been talking is, I think, really empowering people to create this lasting change, and that it's capable and reachable for each and every one of us. Like, we deserve
mhm.
it, right? Everybody deserves health. And so if, and just kind of like to wrap it with a bow, where would you recommend people go after listening to this to get started on their health journey? What would be the first initial steps to really give them the power that they could do this? They could begin today. Doesn't have to be New Year's to lose the weight. Doesn't have to be a wedding. Today, tomorrow, I decide. I like to call it the power of decision. Tomorrow, I decide to take my health into my own hands and that I have the ability to do it. Where would you take them?
Yes.
Where would you lead them
First, I
right
would
now?
hope that it's not tomorrow. I hope it would start right now. So when I
There
meet
you go.
when I meet with someone, I say, this isn't something you're starting tomorrow. As soon as you leave here, my office, which you're seeing the inside of right now, as soon as you leave my office, I want the next meal that you eat to be what's on the program. So there's no lag time there. All too often we operate from a myth that we have forever. I think that you want to take stock of the regrets that you already have accumulated over your life. I think that you can come to a place of appreciating that while you might not be able to undo the regrets of your history, none of us can undo what's happened. I grew up without any real friends as a boy, and there was a variety of reasons for that. It's not so important that it happened as it is important that it shaped me into becoming an empathic, considerate, strong man who's been a force for good. But there was a time in my life that I would have loved to be able to undo the wounds of my history. If I would have had the perfect set of parents, if I would have had a school that was filled with kids like me that understood the different little boy I was, well, I would have had a lot less pain, a lot less suffering. But I also can't say that I would be the man I am today if that hadn't happened. Now, I don't want to excuse the reality that I made choices in the face of that. There could be many people that went through what I went through, and for any number of reasons, end up in jail, end up doing something terrible to themselves, end up hating people, end up becoming addicted to any number of substances because of all that wounding and suffering. But through God's grace, which I certainly believe that God's been at work in my life as early as since the moment I was conceived, I really feel like all of us have a certain amount of grace in our life, and it's and it is always there. But if you'll open yourself to acknowledging it and seeing it, it seems to me that it almost becomes, it doesn't it's not as if it becomes more activated, but you see the things in your life as meaningful more. You realize things aren't just happening, that there's a purpose for things happening to your life. There's an opportunity in the things that happen, even the worst painful things. So the first thing that I think you need to realize is that while you can't undo the pain of your past, you can begin right now to make it such that if I weren't to see you for a year, that you will not have accumulated more regrets about your life.
Hmm.
There's real power in that. Just as a thought experiment, if you have all these regrets about not having taken action, having done this but not stuck with it. Okay, all those things are true and legitimate and valid. But if I didn't bump into you for a full year and I was to meet you, 12 months from now, what would you need to do and change now so that over the course of the next 12 months, you haven't accumulated any new regrets? That would be the question that you'd want to ask yourself. What action could I take right now so that there's nothing new that's stacking up in me that I would regret? Because life is brief. As you get older, you start to recognize that none of us can take our health, can take our relationships, can take any of those things for granted. One given of life amongst probably hundreds is that everything changes and ends.
Hmm.
If I were to ask you, Erica, can you show me a picture of you when you were 7? And you said, yeah, here, Charles, here's a picture. And I said to you, now go find that girl. Where is she? And you said, well, she's right here. No, that's not her. What are you talking about? If I took your picture and I put that next to that 7-year-old, that's not, what are you talking about? That girl, where's that girl? Where'd she go? So everything is changing. Everything is ending. Everything's evolving. That's a scary realization and a recognition to come to as an adult. But it also is something that helps you stay in touch with the gratitude you should have for every moment, the gift that life is for each of us. I was listening to an interview with the comedian Martin Short, and he was married to the love of his life, Nancy, for some 30 years, and she developed ovarian cancer, and she lost her life very early. And to think that each of us are graced with important connections, people in our life. And how often is it the case that the person that when we first met them, we couldn't wait to hear their voice on the telephone, now we forget to even give them a kiss on the cheek as we leave the house.
Mm.
And so you really want to practice the appreciation of everything that you have, including, as you said, this vehicle that is carrying you around. I always believe that we are a spiritual being having a human experience. And so I see this as a vessel, that carries us around. And I think that if you feel like your life has no purpose, if you feel like there's nothing for you in this life, the one thing you can start working on is you right now. Right now. So if you feel like there's no point in my life, it's such a waste, it's so pointless, whatever. Okay, there's one project that is calling your name right now. That's you, Project You. Get to work on that life force of getting your energy up, of getting your health in order, of doing the simple things that are right in front of you. And if you say, well, maybe you're listening to this or someone sent it to you and you feel too depressed to take action, well, do whatever little thing you can do. If it's sitting up in your bed for 5 minutes and then sleeping the rest of the day, but do the 5 minutes. If you'll just take a small step, if you'll break down what feels to be an incredible big task into digestible pieces, you'll build the necessary emotional, mental, spiritual, relational, and physical muscle to make progress. There's a saying of, one thing you could do is to clean out that junk drawer in your house. In other words, start with the smallest little thing that you could get in order. And by doing so, you'd be surprised. The next thing you know, you're doing the whole kitchen. And so start with,
Absolutely.
I think that would be my advice. Start with exactly where you are with what feels actually achievable. Okay, it's not like
Mm.
I'm going to pin up a poster of a supermodel on the wall and I'm going to tell myself that's how I look, because it's not true. You don't look that way. Or if you're a guy, I'm going to get a picture of Arnold Schwarzenegger and put that up and that's going to inspire me. No, that's a great aspiration. But I'd like you to compare yourself not to someone that you admire, but rather to who you were. Compare yourself against who you used to be. Are you living
Mm.
your life more consistent with the highest part of you? Are you more faithful to yourself? Are you more faithful to other people? Because you can't give other people the love that you don't give yourself.
Amen. Amen. So well said. So, so good. And I love that's exactly where people should start. And I think it's brilliant, everything you just shared and touched on there.
Erica,
So,
I'd like to just
where
go around and just keep telling me that. It's brilliant, Charles. It's
well, no, I'm literally just on the other side disagreeing with everything you said because it's just you're crystallizing it to a point that people could really grasp what you're saying and be like, that's true.
well,
This is what I need to do.
thank
And it's really taking responsibility for our life because we are truly in the driver's seat of our own life. Nobody else is. Nobody can control us and we can't control others. The only thing we can control is ourselves. So it's so key. So just to wrap this up, where could people learn more about you, work with you? I hope you're taking on more clients or your team is.
you. Mhm.
Where should we send them? And of course, everything will be plugged in the show
Well,
notes.
thank you. So, yes, in answer to your first part, I do still accept clients. Anyone you read about, watch, or listen to, whether they're someone that's a public figure who's recognizable or if they're a teenager, or if they're a medical doctor, or if they're a stay at home parent, every single person works directly with me one on one. So it is selective in the sense that every person that sends in a form, you go to my website, Charles D'Angelo, it's CharlesDangelo.com, and there's a simple form to fill out. It's 3 questions. What's your name, what's your email address, and what's your phone number? And a member of my team will reach out. They'll schedule a time to meet with me. I meet with clients from all over the world. I still see clients here in St. Louis in my physical office, but I would say probably 65% to 70% of my client population are people from all over the world. I have clients as far as Greece. I have 2 medical doctors that are in Pakistan. I have
Wow.
clients in Australia. I have clients all over the world. I don't say that to impress you. It impresses me, but I say it to impress upon people that no matter where you're listening in from, as long as you have access to a device that will allow us to connect, either vocally or visually or a combination of the two, my clients are just as successful breathing the same air as I do as those that are in a different part of the world. So I have no doubt that if a person's at a point in their life where they really feel like they're on that threshold, they don't want another week to go by, another month to go by where they feel stuck in a place they hate, and they feel like they've tried everything, nothing works. That's the person that should reach out to me. And the way to do it is just go to my website, charlesdangelo.com. I've written 2 books so far. The first book is called Think and Grow Thin. It's available everywhere. You can get it at your bookstores, libraries, Amazon, my website. That book is a very specific guide to help people with the strategy that's precipitated the types of changes you've seen in my life and the lives of all my clients. A very specific food plan, an exercise plan. So if you're a person that you just are saying, look, I get all this stuff about mindset, but I just need a strategy. Well, you can start with the book and see how far you can get. That book was endorsed by President Bill Clinton, as I've worked with many of his friends who've had remarkable success. So you can trust that the strategies and the approach in there is a very tried, tested, and proven one. And if you'll be consistent, you should expect to be really astonished with yourself in terms of how things begin to move in the right direction. The second book is called Inner Guru. And that book is a book taking all of the principles of transformation from weight loss and applying it to the other areas of life, like wealth, relationships, emotional health, those different avenues, and taking all these things we've talked about, these different strategies that a person takes on when they look to change their body, and applying them to those other domains for success as well.
So awesome. Thank you. And again, everything will be in the show notes for y'all to grab everything and do whatever you would like to get access to this man. Okay, closing question. And I know you've shared so much of a wealth of information. So sometimes when I ask this question, I'm like, let's see what you come up with this. But I always ask my guests, if you were to share a piece of wisdom, a life lesson you've learned along your journey, and you feel that is a message that anybody needs to hear right now, what would that piece of wisdom be and why?
I would say that the most powerful thing that you can recognize as a healthy adult is that everything that you need for this life journey you already have. I think that all too often we find ourselves turning to things outside in an effort to give us what we fail to notice we already possess, whether it's making another person bigger than they ought to be in our life, whether it's turning to a substance like food or alcohol or drugs or sex or overworking or achievement. If you can see yourself as complete as you are, as complete as a soul with certain lessons to learn in this journey and a willingness to take on those lessons and to grow and evolve as you do, I think that you'll find your life has a tremendous amount of meaning. I also think that with that in mind, you should make your aim in life not to be happy, but rather to have a meaningful life. I think that a
Mm,
lot of us feel that we're off of track when we're not happy. And I think that we are in a culture that wants to anesthetize, to numb us to pain. Pain is a given of life. So I think if you can accept that pain is not some type of indication that you're off course, it's often an indication that there's something that you need to correct and change. And that if you will listen to that rather than try to numb it, your life can get better. I also think you need to recognize that you're never going to get to a place in your life where you're going to be absent that sense of pain. It doesn't matter how much money you have. It doesn't matter what achievement that you earn. It doesn't matter how many great relationships you have. You're human, and there's never going to be a time where you get into a winner's circle where you can say, "Now I'm exempt from life." I mean,
Right, right.
always going to be a person that's going to have to work on things, that's going to have to experience pain, and that has to recognize that you're not going to find in another person the solution you already have. If you need that portrayed well, go back to that 1939 film, The Wizard of Oz, where at the very end, you remember, I'm sure, that the wizard tells her that she's always had, with those slippers she's been wearing the whole time, what she needed to get back to where she wanted to go. All she had to do was recognize it and take action with it.
So good, so good. And that's one of my lessons that I always share is like so many of us seek all these answers outside of ourselves. We seek the love, we think the validation, all these things, the worth. But really what we need to do is cultivate it within ourselves. So I love the message you shared and also creating a life of meaning. So beautiful.
Can I,
Everything you shared today. Yes.
because I don't want to mislead people.
Yeah.
Important to realize it's not an either or, it's a both and. And by that I mean you should have relationships that validate you, that you feel love in, that you feel appreciated, that you experience tremendous affection, that you feel a degree of acceptance. All those things are fine, no problem. But as an adult, and this goes for adults that are primarily the people that are listening, 75% of those things, of attention, of acceptance, of appreciation, of affection, and of space for yourself, ought to be coming from yourself. And the other 25% should be from your career, your mission, your relationships, your church, whoever it is that feeds into your life. You have to take on the majority of responsibility. That's the point.
Mm-hmm.
You'll do that, you'll have healthy relationships. All of those things that we talked about are too much for one person to handle. So you shouldn't expect that from any one person or thing. 75,
Mm-hmm.
75% of it has to be a self practice, and the other 25% is spread out, okay, amongst these other things: your marital partner, or your romantic partner, or your companion, your friends, your church, your business, all that stuff.
So beautifully said. And I love that clarification. I think that's so key. So much wisdom you shared. I'm so thankful for you,
My
Charles. And thank you for the work you're doing and really transforming people's lives by your mission, your meaningful purpose that you're serving today. And thank you for inspiring us all. I will include everything in the show notes. Everybody go follow Charles D'Angelo. Thank you.
my
This has been so great. I so appreciate you.